Okay, good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Stephen Ruckman, Deputy Director of the SNF Agora Institute. For those of you who don't know us, we are an academic center and public forum at Johns Hopkins University that is dedicated to improving and expanding civic engagement and informed, inclusive dialogue as the cornerstone of global democracy. We are excited to be hosting today's discussion organized by Ivan Mawarire, our first SNF Agora-RDI Dissident in residence. Ivan has invited Srdja Popovic, founder and executive director of the Center for Applied Nonviolent Actions and Strategies, or CANVAS, to join him in sharing experiences of leading protests against authoritarian regimes and talking about the role of online organizing and old-fashioned street protests in a digital age. Ivan Mawarire came to prominence in Zimbabwe as a clergyman and democracy activist who founded the hashtag #ThisFlag citizens movement to challenge the brutal dictatorship of Robert Mugabe. For organizing protests and training citizens, he was imprisoned, tortured, and charged with treason. He now lives in the United States and is the director for education at the Renew Democracy Initiative, a nonprofit and nonpartisan organization whose aim is to strengthen democracy in America and globally. Srdja Popovic founded the student movement Otpor, which translates to resistance, in Serbia in 1998. The organization played a crucial role in ousting President Slobodan Milosevic, a dictator accused of war crimes. Popovic was later elected to the Serbian parliament, where he served for 4 years before he founded CANVAS, a nonprofit organization based in Belgrade that aims to teach the use of nonviolence to make change. Welcome to you both. Now, before I turn it over, just a few housekeeping items. First of all, our conversation will last about an hour. And each of our speakers will take a few minutes to introduce themselves and their work, and they'll spend some time having a back and forth after that before turning it over to audience questions. During the discussion, you can feel free to keep your camera on or off, but just make sure your audio is muted. When you've entered the Zoom, you were muted by default. When it's time for questions, we will be using the raise hand function on Zoom and inviting participants to unmute at that time and pose their questions in turn. I will be calling on people for questions when I see them, and hopefully we'll be able to get to a number of them today. So without further ado, Evan, I'll turn the conversation over to you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I appreciate you setting us up. Thank you for everyone who's showed up today. It really is, such an honor to be able to get my good friend Srdja Popovic into a room and talk about some of the things that we did, in Zimbabwe and things that Srdja did in Serbia. And I think one of the cool things is that when we were starting out in Zimbabwe in 2016 and we were building the movement, didn't know what we were doing. I mean, it was just crazy. Srdja and Otpor and CANVAS, became a reference point. In fact, Otpor became a reference point looking at some of the things they did back in the day. And then, of course, we did some training together with CANVAS, as well. We got a chance to build a citizens movement almost out of thin air, in Zimbabwe in 2016. And I say thin air very loosely because, at the end of the day, there were issues on the ground. We had something that we were standing for, that we were representing, that we were able to galvanize people around. And I'm coming from a place where the movement we started in Zimbabwe had the capability to move a couple of million people at a time in terms of the actions that we did. But the origins of this movement is that we started on Facebook. One video, 4 minutes long, and that became the spark that gave birth to the movement. And in the first maybe 6 months of building the #ThisFlag citizens movement, we did everything purely on Facebook and Twitter. That is where we put the messages out. That's where we mobilized. That's where our call to actions, was as well. That's where we, taught people how to be citizens that speak truth to power. That's how we onboarded. That's how we even challenged the authorities, in Zimbabwe. We challenged the government via social media. We invited them onto platforms, or at least provoked them on social media to get them to respond or to get them to engage during the time. And because it was and still remains illegal to protest on the street in Zimbabwe, we had to find ways of bringing the tweets and the Facebook posts and all the traffic that we had on Facebook and Twitter, bringing it to a place where it translated into being some form of physical force or some sort of recognizable force that the government would respond to. Because I think this is what we learned when we were building the citizens movement, is that authoritarian regimes, and in fact, any government, will not respond to anything that does not have a show of strength or have a show of, its authority to mobilize, because governments respond to numbers of people. It's not always the loudness of one voice. It is how many people can congregate around an idea and begin to push that idea forward. And so we really worked hard on that platform. And I'll give you a sense of what we did is that on July the 6th, 2016, when we realized that the government was not listening to our calls for a better economy, Zimbabwe was running at 286 million% inflation in 2008, and we were heading back into the same in 2016. For those of you that followed Zimbabwe, we had ended up with a $100 trillion note. That's one note, $100 trillion. That was the largest note in 2008, and we were going back to the same thing in 2016. And so we needed to mobilize people to get to a place where we would say we don't want the same thing to happen. How do you do it when you're not allowed on the street? So what we did is that through Twitter and Facebook, over a period of 6 months, we built enough momentum to call what we for a call to action that we called the national shutdown. And it was an idea in which we would ask people to boycott. So this is taking a page from the old street protests, the boycotts of the civil rights movement, here in the US. Ask people to boycott. We wanted to ask the citizens of our country to not go to work, not take the children to school, and not go on the street, not go to the mall, not go to the supermarket. For one day, everyone stays indoors, because you can arrest people for doing that. But that was a process that got us there, and we did everything on Twitter and Facebook to get us to that particular point. And surprisingly, on the 6th of July, that worked. In my humble calculation, between 9 and 12 million people responded to that call, because the entire country came to a complete standstill. And of course, in an authoritarian regime, there are repercussions to that sort of thing. And over a period of 4 years, I ended up arrested. I was in a maximum security prison for a couple of months. We were beaten, we were tortured, charged with treason, escaped once, left the country, came back again, was arrested, went straight back into prison, and we went straight back into mobilizing when we came out. So that's the crux of what we did. And I think part of the question now is trying to figure out whether, is this the new age of protest movements? Is this the new age of movement building? Are we only doing it online? Of course, we found out that there are intersections, but the strength of social media, the strength of technology, the strength of online platforms is something that we found incredibly useful in the authoritarian regime, that we were under Robert Mugabe, and of course under Emmerson Mnangagwa now, in Zimbabwe. Srdja, I'm going to hand over to you. Tell us a little bit more about Otpo and how you guys started that out, and then we can have our discussion.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, Agora. Thank you, Johns Hopkins. Pleasure, thrill, and honor being here, specifically sitting next to my living hero, Evan Mawarire. The holy man of protest, how we call him. So the guy's a pastor. He's just hiding under this lovely little suit. Okay, my name is Srdja Popovic. I may not look like that, but I'm ancient. Otpor was the movement that we made when I was a student, and that was before internet. Well, not really before internet, because Otpor was one of these first pro-democracy movement which had a website, which was kind of tricky in late 90s. And it was only because the Electrotechnical University in Belgrade was run by student protest. And this is where the servers were. That was, the governments were still naive to leave it to the educational institutions, so we could easily overtake it. I've spent last 20 years of my life training people around the globe. And as Ivan pointed, it's a very different environment now. social connectivity, but also,
there we go.
and this will be probably the good point for discussion and questions. So like atomic energy, which can heat hospitals, but also destroy Hiroshima, the internet era brought some good things and also brought some bad things to the social movement. So amongst the good things, definitely, as Ivan says, it makes assembling people faster, quicker, and safer than doing door-to-doors or leaflets or whatever we were doing back there in late 90s. Second, it's very difficult to hide human rights abuse. 50 years ago, Assad's father can go and slaughter 20,000 people, and all he had to do was to expel the foreign media and nobody will know. Now, even in Eswatini, which is the small state probably nobody heard of, in Africa, when you see people protesting, somebody is taping. So, you know, there is always a proof what really happened, and it's very difficult to hide it. Lastly, and most importantly, social networks and internet enable people to learn horizontally. This is a really, really important thing. So what Evan does in Zimbabwe, if this thing is well, somebody will replicate in Hong Kong. And they don't need intermediary, they don't need a training. And because people are very much like animals, and we are the copycats, we try to replicate what we see that works. It also helps people inspire around the globe, around the issue. We witnessed probably 20,000, 25,000 different protests around the globe in support of Ukraine. And that wouldn't be possible without people getting connected online. Now, on the bad side of the things, internet is a precious tool of bad guys, government of Zimbabwe included, to surveil people, to sell them crap. Don't forget that it's all collecting data idea. Another very important aspect is trolling. Because the governments can invest a lot of money, they can produce a lot of fake accounts that will, chase people like Ivan and really will make their life miserable. Getting back into hacking, getting back to the abuse of face recognition, getting back to the censorship and firewalling. You, of course, try to type my name in China and nothing will pop up because I'm a troublemaker. So you cannot go through this wall. However, I think the most problematic thing with internet generally is the polarization and war of truth. And just to point your attention, two of the biggest experts on this, Anne Applebaum and Peter Pomerantsev, are the part of Agora, and they must tell you far more than I do, but read their books. Basically, what algorithms of internet do, they divide people. The more you follow certain people in certain type of news, the more you're likely to get this in your newsfeed. Eventually, that puts us in echo chambers. And as Ivan noted, it's very important to get outside of your zone of confidence. Protest movements become effective when they can reach people who are not alike you, not the people who are like you. So building from the middle, getting to these people who don't care about the issue or are not informed in the issue is a must in building numbers. And as Ivan stated, it is the numbers that really decide whether your struggle is successful. Lastly, before I give it back to Ivan and we go back and forth, interestingly enough, internet era really reshaped the way the social movements are. So they are very different animals than my organization, Otpor. Previous movements were more about the vision, mission statement, organization, and whether they were organized around the traditional groups like NGOs, student groups, labor movements, political parties. Now they're more horizontal. They tend to be triggered by event, and living in US, you are probably witnessing the George Floyd things, living and following war in Ukraine, you've seen the Bucha atrocities, and as Ivan says, 4-minute video can sometimes spark a nationwide demonstration. The good news about it, it's very difficult to predict for your opponent. It's very difficult to oppress. Most importantly, it boosts ownership. So when the movement is horizontal, every single local group feels like it's their own thing. The more people feel the ownership, the more they're likely to invest. On the downside of the things, and let's look at Iran, which is happening as we speak, it's very difficult to formulate a strategy because there is no core organization which dictates the legs and the hands. There is no head. So being leaderless helps in being less oppressive. However, being leaderless can get to the point where people cannot agree about the stuff. They cannot decide who is going to negotiate. And many different things. So long story short, there are good things that internet is bringing to this world, and there are also bad things when it comes to the social movements and social era. Worse of it, the bad guys are learning faster and are investing more into it than the good guys. So with no further ado, I'll give it back to Ivan with a sentence, what needs to be taken out from his amazing, brave, inspiring story. There must be two legs of this, internet and the real world. And let's move from politics into something very non-political. A lot of you remember Ice Bucket Challenge. That was the idea that, you donate to research a certain illness. Ice bucket was a reference to something Stephen Hawking said when he was discovering that he's having this terrible disease. He felt like somebody poured a cold water over his head. The reason that why online campaigns work is because they have a leg in a real world. So it's not only about what you do in the internet, but what you invite people to do in a real world. In other words, Ice Bucket Challenge didn't work only because you had Kim Kardashian and George W. Bush and other people doing funny things in the video. It's because they donated the real money to the real research and they challenged the real people they really know to do the same. Not their Facebook friends, but their real friends. So how to move from tweets to streets is actually where we are looking at this particular thing. With that, I'll give it back to Ivan.
Well, Srdja, thanks a ton, and I think you've hit up upon what the actual, I guess, the question of the day is. From tweets to streets. First of all, how necessary is it? Because as you've just said, we're in an era where we're building movements where you actually have a group of people that say it's unnecessary to be present on the street, or it's unnecessary to crystallize on the street or in person if you can get the attention on on online platforms. If you can go viral, which is another thing, by the way, is there is a sense that if you can go viral, then you've achieved the purpose. And of course, as you're saying, there's a little bit more to that. But I want you to help me address the issue of, if we started a movement on Facebook or Twitter, which has happened with many movements. Actually, there've been many micro movements that have started on Twitter or Facebook that never materialize, on the ground. Is that okay? Can that be a success? Or is it a rule of thumb that we must at some point crystallize in the real world?
Well, the real world is where the real change happened, and I can explain this best with a thing we do when we teach people propaganda and communication. So every issue starts with ignorance. So there is sorry.
Bless you.
Welcome to Colorado and have a nice day. So there
is a pastor. I bless you.
I feel blessed. I feel enlightened. I will start walking. So I'm in Colorado Springs, where we have all of these televangelical churches, so you can come and earn a lot of money. Speaking of, now get back to the question. It actually can kill activism, because people, when they ask me what the Serbs will do if they have Twitter, they will just steam off their anger with angry tweets. A lot of them wouldn't be forced to really meet in person and organize. So this selectivism is kind of seductive. And how many polar bears have you saved by clicking on a certain Facebook pages, instead of really turning your computer off, saving some energy and helping the planet? So the main point here, Evan, is, as you said, what is the real world leg, which we call the call to action, like the real action, not the share, tweet, whatever, like, or whatever, however it's called on TikTok. I'm too old for that thing. I will need to learn. I have a kids coming of that age. So basically looking into this is, you can build anything from ignorance, interest, information, passion. And this process is called public awareness rising. So actually, for this process, the social media are great, but from there to action, there must be a clear call to action. And even outline something that I really want to take a look at. So working with social movements, dealing with amazing people like Ivan, I have a bad news for you. There is only a little portion of society which is like him. So if the society would be much better if we have more Ivans and less people who care about their own things. So people are selfish. They're not very likely to invest a lot. So the trick in public mobilization, where you're looking at a very oppressive society like Zim, or you're looking at a non-oppressive society like Sweden, is offering people a cheap entry point. So what is this thing that you can do in a real world, which is, you know, if people expect me to sit in cold and demonstrate the war in Ukraine, I probably won't be doing this because it's cold, or I'm too spoiled, or I don't care for Ukraine that much. If people say, oh, you need to put a bumper sticker on a car, of course I have support Ukraine bumper sticker on my car, or put a flag in front of your door, or, you know, give $5 or whatever it is. So basically taking a look at this gives you the answer. What is the low entry point, or in a case of Zimbabwe, boycott? What is the low risk bar? So don't go on the street or get killed, but, you know, stay at home for 1 day. So the trick in public mobilization, and it has proven to be effective, is make it viral, make it repeatable, make it you know, appealing for the people, but also give them something to do. Let's take a look at the Ukraine. So it's far away. The Putin is evil. What can I do in Colorado Springs? I can go and take a look at a page which tells me that 2 companies, Carl's Jr., which is, by the way, selling awful burgers, and Domino's Pizza, are among those that haven't pulled back from Ukraine. So my students at Colorado College now are developing the campaign, which is when you go and buy pizza, you have a photo of slice of pizza, but you put it on the internet with the hashtag, "This is not the Domino's." So look at this. By doing this, we are putting a pressure on the company to withdraw from Russia. Eventually, if company withdraws from Russia, that means less money for bombs that are killing Ukrainian children. You can do it at home. It's fun. And you're doing something in the real world, because by not buying Domino's Pizza, but buying XYZ Pizza, this is not a paid commercial, so I will not appoint the brands, is taking a look at this. This is something you can do. And you're doing 2 things. In the real world, you're hurting Domino's Pizza. In the online world, you are posting the photo of whatever pizza you are eating with a hashtag. So breaking it down, yes, it's doable, yes, it's achievable, but there must be a real world action that will hurt Domino's instead of just trolling Domino's. If they start losing money, this is when they will pull back from Russia.
So, you know, this is really interesting, because I think a lot of what we end up calling the result of what we do online, or what we do on online platforms, is trolling, like you've just said, you know, and we end up mistaking the ability to troll or make fun of, which is a tactic, by the way, in activism. You know, I remember it might have been, and you have to remind me where this was, where they painted the pictures of politicians around the potholes in the roads.
2016, you know, Russia, Yekaterinburg. So when you hit the pothole, then you get,
you hit the face of the politician, right? That's there, and they fixed those portals. And I think I can see, you know, Srdja, you're looking for that. But that's the thing that I wanted to kind of hit on, to say that sometimes the illusion is that if we can make enough fun of an organization, or enough fun of a cause, then we've achieved it. But you're saying that this must translate to real world action. So
as you mentioned it now, the creativity matters, and also this happy marriage between technology and what's happening in the real world. And I want to just point you things to the 2 slides. Movements are terribly creative. Researching into movements is the best job on planet. So on the right hand side, something that looks like hockey puck. So this is like, people found a way to organize around potholes. Why this is interesting? Because they're non-political, they're non-inspiring. So we found 25 different ways people were treating potholes, from very offline, making a face of a mayor around the pothole, and when you hit the pothole, you actually curse the mayor, to the very environmental. The city of Bulawayo, there's this guy who was putting the trees in the potholes to shame the city government. But this is Panama City, what I'm showing you. And the machine looking like a little hockey pack is invented by activists. Panama City is the Miami of Central America, the tax haven. So you have a Miami and you have a 1950 failing infrastructure under the Miami, which is sinking. So people by making the machine, once again, technology can help, and you put in a pothole. So what machine does, when you hit the machine with a car and it's hard rubber, it tweets. And it tweets straight to the mayor's account. And it says something like, oh, I'm a pothole at the corner of Cascade and Nevada, and I just heard the car of this old lady, fix me, fix me, fix me, please. 14,000 tweets a day. But it's happening in a real city, in a real world with the real potholes. And now internet is trolling the mayor in order to make him do the potholes. Another great example of mix between real life and is on the left-hand side. And no, these are not ghosts marching. These are holograms. So in 2018, before the elections, the Spain came with a gag law because the politicians were tired of the people yelling in front of the parliament. They say, no, this is a no-go zone. You can protest wherever you want, but not on this particular square in front of the parliament. So what people did, they organized in different places around Madrid. They tape this with a high-resolution camera. They hire a company which make holographs, and then they projected the holographic protest in front of the parliament where it was banned. So once again, they did it in a place where it was legal, so it was impossible to arrest them, low risk. They projected it to the place, and this thing, of course, get the attention of the world media as a first world holographic protest. You notice something? It's a happy marriage between technology and offline. So you still have traditional people with traditional banners and, pickets and stuff like that, which are marching the very 60s wave, but you are extrapolating this into modern technology. So in both of these cases, you've seen the elements of online and offline, the elements of technology and, kind of a Stone Age protest technology. But what we do as humans is we progress by understanding this connection. So looking into the creativity of movements and how they use technology to bypass whatever their opponents are doing is really inspiring thing. But once again, I sound like a broken record here. I'm coming from a time where people were still listening music to the vinyls, not on a YouTube. Nothing happens only on internet. You can name and shame dominoes on internet. It is when dominoes will start losing money and comparing the money that it loses from your boycott, which may be sparked and fueled by the internet, but it's a real boycott, and then going to the place where they decide where they want to pull back their 50 shops from Moscow. So once this thing is bigger than this thing, this is when they pull back. And this revenue change happens from people not buying pizza, the real pizza, bad pizza, but real pizza in the real world. And yes, humor matters. Somebody had a great comment. Humor is a best tool to break fear. Humor is a great tool to break apathy. Humor makes your opponent looks ridiculous. And very often, guys in power have a really boosted ego. So they respond stupidly. Sorry for taking you floor. I was so loud and energetic that I blew up Ivan from the Zoom. Where are you, my friend?
Can you see me and hear me now? So this is the very thing we're talking about is how sometimes technology works for you and sometimes it doesn't. I for some reason I froze out of that, but that speaks into, I think, one of the challenges that we had because we were entirely based on internet platforms. When push came to shove and we had pushed the regime really hard, they just went and pulled the plug for the whole internet across the whole country. And suddenly the entire movement came to a complete standstill. And I think this is where in my mind, I kind of think about the importance of building structures that exist outside, the online platforms. And I'm wondering if I can get your insight on that. Like, how do you build those networks? How do you keep them going? such that if you do, because this is what happens in most authoritarian regimes now, internet shutdowns have become a thing because we depend on that internet. How do we do that in this day and age where we are so used to connecting online? When they are shut down the way that it has happened in Zimbabwe, the way that it has happened in different parts of the world, how do we keep the connection? How do we keep the movement fed and going and effective outside of that?
So first of all, you are so right, and you're pointing to the very important part of this, which is the organization. Now, forget internet. Let's take a look at how society works. There are two processes which are impacting the change. The process of mobilization, where numbers grow, people get passionate around the issue. George Floyd is choked and people want to go on the street and want to do something. And this is very water process. It comes in waves or tides. So people get heated up, the numbers grow, and so on and so forth. It is the organization, which looks like a little bricks or little stairs, that you build below this organization. So mobilization wave goes, you use the top of the wave for recruiting people, and this is where you start building teams and building local networks. It is because of the local networks, which were called neighborhood committees, that, for example, Sudanians, which did amazing anti-coup movement a few years ago, were able to survive not only through the repression, but through complete internet blackout. People were meeting each other in neighborhoods. There were couriers, there was structure there, decisions were made there. People decided how to protest, when to go from streets to boycott, what tactics to use, and things of that kind. So the internet blackout didn't affect them. In contrary, it made them come together. There's a very interesting research, and I don't remember who published it, because Egyptian revolution in 2011 was just 2 weeks. So you can follow mechanically the number of the people on the street in Tahrir every day. The two largest peaks were at the days where internet was shut down, because people were cut from the news, and I'm home and my brother Ivan is on the square, so I go to see what happens with them. Or even worse, I have a teenage kid who is on the square and I'm not in touch with that kid. Of course I will go. So taking a look at how understanding how this works means you know they will shut it down. You prepare for when you shut it down, and you actually use a blackout for the tool of mass mobilization, because
actually mobilize.
Blackout is very hammer type of tool. So when you do the internet blackout, you're not only hurting activists, you're hurting people who are trading on the internet, ordering their shit on Amazon. For example, the Burmese junta is so sloppy. Every time they shut the internet down, we have an ugly Burmese government now owned by the military. And every time people go on the street, they shut the internet down. But they also shut banking, because the cards don't work. People cannot buy stuff. So you actually want, if you are ready, you can turn the internet blackout into the mobilization tool. And movements have done this.
That is, of course they have. I'm going to hand back to Steve in a moment to get questions, but that's such an exciting point for me, because that exact same thing happened to us. When we had mobilized for the shutdown, and the government, when they went ahead and they shut the internet down, what it actually did is that it increased participation, curiosity. People then felt like, wow, so this is really happening. And of course, the numbers of people that boycotted and stayed away or went to the street in the later protests that we put together, those numbers ballooned simply because they had shut it down. So I love this aspect of we use the online platforms to mobilize, to organize, and to communicate, but we also use the disruptions of that platform, of that strategy. We use that disruption to then crystallize on the ground, to make the ground movement even bigger, even stronger, even more effective, rather than for it to actually shut down. So I feel like that's a really, really cool way where those two worlds meet. I'm going to hand back to Stephen to lead us in questions and comments or whatever people may have. But yeah, Srdja, I'm just loving the way that you've brought in a bunch of these examples and ways in which we can understand how we go from tweets to streets, but the other way, how streets can also feed back into tweets. Stephen, back to you.
Sure, thank you both very much. And yeah, so we would welcome your questions now. You can raise your hand, and we'll unmute you. If to raise your hand, you go to the bottom of your screen, you click on reactions, and you'll see a raise hand option. And we can also, you're welcome to type your question in the chat if you'd prefer to do it that way, and we can call on you that way. I wanted to just kick us off with one question about what you were both just talking about in terms of internet cutoff. I mean, for some pro-democracy movements, the internet is available until the movement reaches a certain crest. But there are some countries where most social media platforms are just flat out banned, and so you don't have even that initial opportunity to create digital momentum. And I'm wondering if either of you have talked with folks in those countries, about ways they can kind of circumvent those challenges, and if there's other digital tools that are at their disposal.
Maybe let me start off here before we hand over to Srdja, who's clearly the expert, through the work they've done with Canvas. One of the things that we saw in Zimbabwe was when the internet was shut down, or when there were certain controls that were being put to control what was happening with the internet in Zimbabwe, the ecosystem of the movement, the online ecosystem of the movement outside Zimbabwe became the lifeline. That's where we started to really gain momentum. And that became where all the information and everything existed or grew or continued to circulate. And then it would find its way back in from the outside through the use of VPNs. And I think this is, again, one of the things that we learned to do after the first shutdown, is preparing people to use these virtual private networks where you can still access the internet from within, and also, be safe doing so, and you're still able to get information into the country. You're still able to disseminate information within the country. For example, the platform WhatsApp became very, very key for us. Many people were able to get information shared across the WhatsApp platform when the main part of the internet had been shut down. So it was constricted, but we were able to get information in and out. But I go back to the first part of my answer, which is those that, for example, Zimbabweans in the diaspora became extremely important to making sure that the information was not only preserved, but it was, they continue to be a momentum, and they filtered that right back into the country through other means. Or as soon as the internet came back on, all of that information came back flooding into Zimbabwe and took the movement literally to the next level, because of that.
I would
yes,
add,
Srdja, do you have thoughts?
I would add completely another line of thinking to this. When you say social networks, and of course, we always think about the things like Facebook and Twitter, but it is the social networks that authoritarians are so afraid of. And whether you want to read George Orwell's 1984, or you look at the Soviet Union in the 60s, the state did everything to cut the horizontal connections between people, including encouraging kids to report on their parents if they talk politics at home. So any connection between the people, and that goes back from the internet, it goes to the very offline forms of organizing. Neighboring to Zim, there's this amazing place called South African Republic, which has this large struggle against the apartheid in 70s and 80s. Do you know how they communicated? No TV, 2 radio stations owned by state, 3 newspapers owned by state. They were sending kids from village to sing songs. So it is this, because there is a rich history of oral history in South Africa. So it's the way how they learn the history, through storytelling. So imagine how these young couriers who were 7, 8, 9, the age of my kids, would go and inspire the village about the story, about what's happening in the capital or something like that. Also, any kind of connection, comes to branding and symbol and visuals and gesturing. It can be a clenched fist in Serbia, Hunger Games salute in place like Thailand, a victory sign in Burma, or this is, if you can
white paper in China.
White paper in China. So because I'm doing this, and this is very simple, and because Evan is doing this, we know that we are not alone. And this is the moment of the social network, pre-internet social network. Getting back to the shutdown idea, getting back what movements can do, they can refer back to this playbook. There's this amazing revolution in Chile against the lovely guy named Pinochet, who tended to throw opposition leaders from helicopters. And of course, protesting was off the chart. And then people, on one specific day, they played for referendum, there was this Independence Day, and they concentrated their efforts to do something really big, which is a social networking on steroids. Instead of going for a protest, they call people, as Evan said, they call them to drive half speed. And they call them to walk half speed. Okay, this is 25 years before internet. So here is Santiago de Chile, the big congested city. Immediately, of course, they pick the rush hour for maximal effect. Even in Chile, it's not illegal to drive slower than 20 miles an hour. And now people are driving slowly. The traffic is in the collapse. Everybody is honking to everybody, saluting everybody. And everybody is walking slow, like the slow motion movie. You put a little bit of slow on your Netflix. And there is a guy witnessing this, recorded in a documentary called The Force More Powerful. And he says amazing thing, which I want to discuss here. Once again, this was before internet. And he says, this is when this big bubble of fear just disappeared. Because by simple virtue of seeing my neighbors driving cars slowly and seeing a guy I'm picking a kid from a school next to walking on a pavement, we recognize that we are the many and they are the few. So this moment of revelation, this type of connection can be achieved through other means where you're bypassing the thing through VPN and making, defense of what you want through this connection. We're doing something really, really simple, but doing it offline.
Thank you both so much. And I see we have questions coming in. I'll start with Victoria, so you can unmute now.
Sure. Thank you very much to both of you for the inspiring stories and sharing your experiences. I was wondering whether you could also comment on how we get from tweets to streets to actual change, because so I'm less familiar with the situation in Zimbabwe, my apologies, but definitely in the case of Serbia, I do have a lot of friends and colleagues who protested in the early 2000s against Milosevic, and now they've all left the country because they're basically saying there's not been much change, and some actually say it's gotten a lot worse, especially when it comes to freedom of speech. They've been harassed and assaulted on the street. Not even to speak of the assassination of Dingic. So how do we actually get to, we've mobilized people, but now we actually need change? Of course, you could also go as far as saying we could question how far the Arab Spring was truly successful, which I guess shares actually a lot of the same elements that you just addressed. Thank you.
So I'll kick off, Evan, because Serbia is mentioned. Basically, this has nothing to do with tweets. This has something else to do. This has something to do to understand that there is a big difference between the protest and the movement. And protesting on streets, even in large numbers, like in Iran, or in small numbers, like in Serbia, this is not the movement. Movement is the place where people understand where they're going, and specifically where there is a strategy of change. So which pillars, which institutions you want to shift, which small victories you pick, and very often in a place like Serbia, people are more likely to protest around corruption and environmental issues, rather about the politics, than taking a look at what may be the small achievable victories along the line. So you want to cancel Rio Tinto mine, which was the only tangible victory in Serbia in several years. You focus on one topic, and you focus on the institutions which are related to this topic, and you put the pressure on these institutions. So instead of just thinking big and tweeting big and going on the street and yelling, you're looking at what movement can do to impact certain pillars. And you start with local pillars, you put the pressure on your municipality, you put the pressure on a certain ministry, you put the pressure on a certain media which are not reporting about the issue, and then you can go physically and block the road wherever the mine should be built. If you don't see these elements, you can have millions of people on the streets and still lose. So there is a connection between the mobilized people and the success level, but this connection goes back to the fact, answering the question, is there a movement, or this is just a bunch of hungry citizens? Is there a communication between the people and the people inside the institution and what others are doing? So, a long story short, Serbs are among many people who don't learn from their history. Otpor was not successful because we were terribly talented and now we left the country and there is nobody terribly talented. It was successful that after 8 years of trying and failing, 92 and then 96, 97, we figure out what we want to do, which steps needs to be taken, and we were capable of building small victories step by step and then building numbers around this large strategy that we will mobilize people, Milosevic will lose elections, he will steal elections, we will document the fraud, and then protest, and then general strike, and then October the 5th. The reason why this was successful was not that we were clever or there was many of us. It was there was a sound strategy. So it is about, do you have strategy, and that works equally in offline and online world.
We have a question from Isabella.
Yes, hi. I'm speaking from Venezuela. Big fan of y'all, the Agora Institute and Srdja. So I'm asking, my question is about the social media in that sort of transition between the protest and the peace building in a way. The moment in Venezuela, we've had obviously like a pattern in which the moment in which we have enough leverage to actually bring the government to negotiation, people get out of the streets because our narrative doesn't actually fit us actually going into the negotiating table. I think we've learned a lot. The repertoire of action in Venezuela is way bigger than it used to be, in the sense that now we are supporting the teachers that are protesting. We wanted the negotiation in Mexico to be a success, and we are gonna go to elections. But the harm is done in terms of the fact that the opposition is completely splintered. But so the power of social media in the terms of the peace building part in the negotiation, I mean, feel social media is more suited towards more maximalistic strategies rather than, you know, being specific about the institution you need to address at a certain moment. So, you know, that's a question. I don't know if you have an answer for that, but maybe at least a reflection. Thank you.
Evan, do you want to comment on this? Because Venezuela is so much like Zimbabwe. All prerequisites for success are there, but there is no success.
Yeah, I think a lot of the challenges that we faced in Zimbabwe were based on the fact that when we built the citizens movement, or when we built the different campaigns that we built, getting that to a place where it continues to go beyond just the moment was always tough, because people wanted change immediately. And the long haul effect of social movements, or the long haul effect of organizing, cannot be overlooked. And I think sometimes people need to be trained in not just the fact that we want a result, but that there's going to be a process to the results, that we want. Now, I'm trying to answer the question, the part that I caught, my connection kind of lagged a little bit. So there's a process to it, and sometimes people get tired of the process and just want the result. And I think this is part of what we faced in Zimbabwe. It's part of what I see even in Venezuela. It's part of what I see even in places like Nicaragua as well, is the length of time it takes. People who join social movements or online movements that are very, very explosive in their birth and, very viral in their nature, also are looking for that result that comes through straight away. The moment you start talking about a process that's taking us months, that's taking us years, that's going to be a problem. But to the point earlier on concerning how do we then achieve real change through these movements and through these these mobilizations that we do. We started talking in Zimbabwe about tweets to streets to seats. And what we discovered was that some of the people who were part of building social movements, who were part of building, part of organizing, eventually at some point will begin to move into public office. And that's okay. That is not a failure of what we're doing. That's part of it. Part of it is that movements and organizing and protest movements are injecting new lifeblood into the public leadership, into the political, leadership, introducing new voices. Some don't go into seats or into public seats. Some go into building NGOs and civic society that becomes an integral fabric of, keeping the civics going, keeping people engaged, keeping public office, accountable. So there's a success in both those arms. Some movements actually just carry on as movements. But I just wanted to point out that the change is then achieved through one of those, arms where successfully we've seen people run for public office and do some amazing things. We've seen successfully people go into a more organized, formalized civic society and birth organizations that bring amazing change.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions coming in. There's two in the chat. One is about how do we document and archive the social media engagement that happens as part of protest? It can come up so quickly, but it becomes history. And the other is about how can movements use social media. There's anti-democratic uses of social media, and what are the effective counters to that? Is it just you have a competing story that you can get out, or are there other ways to get around anti-democratic uses of social media for disinformation? So you can, either one of you can answer one or both.
Yeah, I'm not a big expert on documenting things, but there are organizations that document what happens in certain places, and they are following the trends. And like, if you follow the Institute for Study of War on Twitter, which I will, if you're interested in conflict in Ukraine, they're taking military bloggers and they're taking visuals. They're actually making the war maps out of what they pull from social media. So a lot of organizations are doing this, and it makes a lot of sense. There's also a thing called live maps. So if you go to Zim live maps, for example, you see all the tweets and stuff documented in process, and you can follow it. It was very vivid in Venezuela during the large wave of protests. So there are places where you can really follow it. The second question is what your opponent does. And there are three types of engagement when it comes to bad guys on the internet. First of them was you're cutting things. You're cutting information, you are censoring information, you are closing accounts, or you're cutting internet as its most extreme things. And I think we spend a lot of time explaining how this actually can be used, a tool of mobilization, how you can bypass this. This is a very primitive and an ancient way, if you want, if there is ancient in the internet, of response to this. The second is making your own propaganda machinery. And we are still losing war to Putin. Majority of world, not America and Europe including, are still thinking that Putin is fighting the bad Nazis in Ukraine, in Brazil, in India, in Bolivia, because he's controlling the online space. So taking a look into this machinery and making your own machinery that is spreading the narrative is a very clear chess game. Most dangerous way that internet impacts the thing is a war of truth. So it is not the lie that your opponent is spreading about something. It is a phenomenon that my friend Pierre Pomerantsev called whataboutism. So that means that nothing matters. Change doesn't matter. And it comes hand in hand with conspiracy theories. The answer to conspiracy theories is not facts, because people who believe in conspiracy theories, they consider themselves red-pilled, to use the Matrix terminology, so that they will not even read about the vaccine, or they will not even read about the climate change, because it's all fake. It's the agency. The reason why conspiracy theories are so dangerous is because they are playing to the lazy part of your brain. And they say there is this big cabal of evil lizards that is somehow controlling the planet. And vaccines are all about, I know, Bill and Melinda Gates in 2 doses, putting chips inside you, but you need 2 doses because they are divorced now. And of course, you believe in this. The trick here is not saying, oh, no, there is a scientific research which shows 33% of whatsoever less COVID. It's human agency. Is to prove to these people that change is possible, is in acting as opposed to fact-checking the lies. So, you know, the real answer to this is the action in the real world.
Thank you. We're coming close to the end of our time. I'm going to try to squeeze in two more questions from Linda and from Daniel. So Linda, why don't you go ahead and unmute at this time?
Yes, my question is about the internet in general. I think that who controls the internet is more powerful than any president, any Department of Defense, anyone. And at the same time, the internet is the most vulnerable and unpredictable thing of communication. I have a first-hand experience. What is your position on that?
I'm going to come in real quick before Srdja comes in. First of all, I think you're right that I think what we're beginning to see over the last, you know, especially right now, over the last maybe couple of months, is that whoever controls a particular platform is going to have a big impact on who you know, is heard or seen on that. We've seen this happen with Twitter. That as Twitter has changed hands, so has the way that it works in terms of who speaks, who doesn't, who is seen, who is not, who who has more, who has a louder voice, and who doesn't. And I think at the end of the day, this is where I find the idea of organizing once again physically with networks that are not dependent on the internet becomes important. It takes a lot more work, but in the long run, it builds a much healthier, much stronger movement, or much stronger a communication platform that that is not only dependent on on the internet. But having said that, at the end of the day, I also have a sense that the authenticity of a message and the strength of a message is not always going to do it, but I think goes a long way in overcoming the fact that that message may be suppressed on an internet platform. I've seen that the numbers of people who share a message or who believe a message and can share a message can ultimately overwhelm a platform. So I think that there's got to be a certain amount of authenticity that goes beyond kind of just the nice bells and whistles of a message, but that ability to be able to communicate why something matters so much to not just me as an individual, but to all of us, to make someone else care at the same level that I care about something, and to get them to share that with their friend and to share that with their network. What you want as a pastor, this is what we always spoke about when we built the movement, what you want is not to build followers, you want to build disciples. You want to build people that will share the message with the same passion, that will find ways of onboarding other people onto the same message with the same passion that you have.
Thank you so much. Let's in the time, let's close this out with Daniel. Daniel, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Daniel. I am from Kenya. I have a very brief question. How is there any way, or the challenges that comes from the middle class, refusing to be part of advocacy towards change? Because we are seeing there's a blame game here in Kenya. That post-electoral period, the middle class is becoming a problem, to initiatives and advocacy that are pro-democratic, because they sit pretty and they're comfortable by the status quo. Did you experience this in Zimbabwe? And how did you deal with it? Thank you.
You are muted, Evan.
There we go. Daniel, thank you. Really good question. And yes, we did experience this in Zimbabwe, to be very brief as time comes to a close, where we experienced the middle class not wanting to get involved because they felt that the issues were not, something that affected them. And you'll find this happens more and more. When people feel like the problem is not theirs or is not affecting them directly, they have the luxury to sit it out. In Zimbabwe, however, we're approaching now a period where the issues were affecting everyone. And so we always endeavored in our messaging to teach and train people in our model of onboarding that you don't care about a problem simply because it's affecting you today, but you care about a problem because if you don't address it today, it will affect you tomorrow. There is a point at which it will knock at your door personally. And so that became a huge part of our mobilization strategy. We found ways to get people to care. How does this affect you today, or how will it affect you tomorrow? Why must you get involved today and not wait until it becomes absolutely necessary? My own story is almost evidential of that, because it is only when it really affected me personally that I stood up and spoke up, and of course the movement was birthed. So we've always done some special messaging towards the middle class to say, don't wait until until it affects you, because it will. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. And the more people in the middle class understood that and joined, then they were able to bring in their own fellow middle classes into the movement as well.
Srdja, any
Stephen,
thoughts on that?
I'll hand back to you.
Nothing to add to this. Once again, internet is important. Internet brings good thing. Tweets are cool. Go on Twitter and see the tweets. In the same time, it brings a lot of isolation, echo chambering, dismobilization, fake activism, trolling, and war on truth. Don't get super excited by this phenomenon. If you're looking into social change, use it as you will use a megaphone. But always have in mind that the real change is happening in the real world. And what really needs to be there in order to make your campaign effective is a vision, strategy, organization, and a clear call to action.
Thank you so much, Srdja. Thank you, Evan. Thank you for sharing your vision and your strategy. It's been a really inspiring conversation, and sorry we couldn't get to all the questions from all of you who attended, but we appreciate you being here today. Yvonne will be hosting a second virtual conversation next month, and we hope you'll join us for that. Jamila Rakib, who is Executive Director of the Albert Einstein Institution and a specialist in the study and practice of strategic nonviolent action, will join him for a discussion called Moment to Movement, about building sustainable movements out of single action moments in an autocratic environment. And I know that's a topic many of you were asking about today. So to register for that, you can click the link in the chat, and we hope to see you there. Also, we invite you to visit our website and join our mailing list if you haven't already, to learn more about SNF Agora's other programming. Thank you again, Yvonne and Srdja, for a great conversation, and thank you all for joining us today. Hope you have a great afternoon.